Is there typically a trackable event that you can go back to figure out the origins of this, or is it sometimes not that easy?
For some of them, there can be, but then it really does take a life on and of its own, where this idea that just something has to remain perfect, and why it is the thing that it is, I can't always tell you, nor can the people I'm working with always tell me as well, too, why it's that one. I mean, I've worked with people who a piece of furniture has to be perfect, a car has to be perfect, and they can't say why it's okay that anything else in their life doesn't have to be, but this thing does. It just, OCD latched onto this thing, and that's the thing.
That is a good segue into some misconceptions about OCD. You said they might have one thing that is perfect or has to be perfect. Doesn't have to be everything in their life. So I think a lot of people imagine that everybody with OCD is very clean, orderly, wash their hands. I know that's not the case. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I get people who come in and say, well, I was told I don't have OCD because on the Zoom, the therapist could see my house and see I had a messy house. And they said, well, everyone with OCD has a clean house. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Yeah. If your OCD is not about cleanliness, you don't care about cleanliness, and it doesn't really matter, right? OCD takes on very specific things or subtypes and really focuses on those things. There's other people I've met who are really focused on cleanliness who haven't taken a shower for a year. And you might say, well, that sounds really weird. Well, but the reason they don't take a shower is they know that once they get in the shower, it's a 12-hour ritual to do. And it's so overwhelming to start because they can't stop it, they feel, once they get it started. And so they just avoid it totally so that they don't even have to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some other misconceptions that you see about OCD, things that people might get wrong about it or assumptions they make that are not necessarily realistic?
Yeah, well, one of them being this idea that it's helpful in some way. The reason I'm successful is because of my OCD. If that was the case, my job would be to give OCD to people. I'd go up to non-successful people and say, you haven't been really doing well. Have you thought about OCD as a way to just boost your productivity and your profitability for your company? Because I think a little OCD in you and all your employees would just be the key thing to do. No. I just did a wonderful podcast interview for the Get to Know OCD podcast with Brad Feld, who's an amazing entrepreneur and so many books out and everything. And I posed that question to him, and he got visibly angry with the notion that OCD has ever been helpful to anyone whatsoever. I mean, it was just, you could see the steam coming out. He's like, I get so mad when I hear this kind of thing. So we don't tell people to develop mental health conditions as a way to improve their life. We just don't.
Where do you think that comes from? What do you make of the idea that people like to portray it as a key to a superpower or something like that?
Mental health has been entertaining before television. I did a practicum down at in Jackson, Mississippi at I can't even say the name of the old place because it was so non-PC that they had to change the name.
Yeah.
But across the street from it, I'll just say Hudspeth is where I went. Across the street from Hudspeth was the Jackson State Hospital. And I went over there to do some of our, CPI training and things just to protect yourself and stuff. And I was talking to one of the people that worked there. It was kind of a historian of the place. And he said, what happened in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the reason the fence here is the way that it is, it's not a private fence, it's just bars, and every 6 inches there's another bar. And he said what would happen is on Sundays after church, people would make a picnic and then come and sit outside the fence, and then the hospital would let all the patients out onto the grounds, and people would just watch the people doing hallucinating and having delusions. And that was Sunday entertainment in Jackson, Mississippi in the early 1900s.
Yeah. So this is not new for us.
This is not
sick to my stomach hearing that.
Yeah. This is not new. Right. And OCD has been something that people have decided, well, if you can bring something fun into mental health conditions, that's the condition to do it. Because there's not a lot of fun in depression, right? Obviously, whatsoever. And people who are in manic spaces end up becoming amazingly destructive. But there's this notion that, okay, if you're going to have something and we can make a movie about it, we could put a twist on OCD or a TV series on it or something of that nature. And OCD became the butt of the joke for a lot of people. Even though the World Health Organization at one point in time has listed OCD as one of the top 10 most disabling conditions in the world, we've put a spin on it that says, oh no, you know what OCD stands for? Obsessive Christmas disorder. And we put that on t-shirts and sweatshirts at Christmas time.
Yeah.
I have obsessive Christmas disorder or something like that.
Realistically, the functional impact of OCD on somebody's life can be very, very drastic. Of course, there's a range, right? Mm-hmm. But what kind of limitations do you see in, you've been practicing for a long time. What are some of the types of ways that actually impact somebody's life every day?
I've seen people have to get skin grafts because they were in a shower for 24 hours and they literally, because of 24 hours of water hitting their skin, they damaged themselves. They needed to have emergency surgery because they couldn't get out of the shower. They didn't just feel that they were clean enough, right? I've seen people lose their jobs. People turn to substances as a way to try to neutralize some of these things. So now they go on to develop substance use. I opened the first treatment center in the world that treated people with both substance use and OCD at the same time, the Foglia Family Foundation Residential Treatment Center outside of Chicago. And I did an interview once with someone who told me that they were on their 25th detox, and I was the first person to ever ask them about anxiety or OCD.
Wow. Because, yeah, you can really, really see why that would be a temptation. What else are you going to do if you don't have proper tools to, quiet that chatter and quiet that intrusion?
And there's so much shame that comes with OCD too, especially with some of the subtypes. So one of the subtypes is pedophilic OCD, this fear of what if I were to harm a child? Well, you start telling your friends that and they're like, whoa, dude, you cannot come to my house anymore. Or, I got kids or something like that. And it's so isolating and you feel so disgusted by some of these thoughts and images and urges that you feel that you're having. And you think, oh my gosh, what can I do to quiet this down? And people have suicided because they just think that they're terrible people for even having these thoughts, or they turn to substances as a way to try to neutralize it. Now, it's hard to talk about these things. I have a colleague who did an entire podcast about, pedophilic OCD, and someone out there who was an influencer said, oh, look at this guy. He's just trying to allow for pedophiles. He's making excuses. And he had to go off the air for a year because he was just slammed by so many people and the followers of this person. So we don't want to accept science a lot in our society, right? We want to jump to conclusions right off the bat, but people with OCD are suffering. And what does OCD do? OCD takes the thing that's the most important thing to you and it turns it into doubt and insecurity. You may absolutely love children. You may have opened a daycare because your passion is just raising kids and making sure they're okay. But that's what OCD is going to attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. What if I did this because X, Y, Z? What if I actually want to do this?
Yeah. I stood for 3 hours at a train track with someone once with them behind me and their hands on my shoulders and me yelling at them to push me into every train that came by because they were so afraid that they would kill people on train tracks by just pushing people all the way down the line onto the tracks and the train would just run them over. Now, I will tell you, Robert, I was not afraid. And I'd be more afraid of somebody without OCD behind me on a train track than I would be of somebody with OCD on a train track. Because I know the person with OCD is going to do everything they possibly can to make sure that nothing bad will ever happen. But our perception, sadly, in society is that thoughts equal reality. We call this thought-action fusion, this notion that thoughts are bad, and if you have a thought, it means that you want to do it. And if you go back to the 1960s, before Myers' first work on ERP and OCD, the prevailing belief was compulsions are the very thing that stop people from going through with their obsessions, and therefore you must let people do their compulsion. So that was until 1966.
Wow.
So we are now only 58 years past that. right?
Yeah.
That's how young we are in treating obsessive compulsive disorder in such a way that we can actually make an impact on people's life.
Yeah. So that's when we were relatively young in the productive treatment of this, because that's completely counterproductive, what you were just describing.
Oh, yeah. You want to keep someone stuck for the rest of their life, having them do compulsion.